All right, well, let's get going. Good morning, everyone. My name is Danny Nelms. I'm the CEO at Work Institute, and today's webcast is part of our executive leadership webcast series, How Employee Feedback Standards Fail to Deliver Business Success. I was actually talking to my colleague a little earlier, and maybe the title of this can be a little bit misleading. I think it would have been better saying how employee survey standards fail to deliver business success. And that's really what we're going to be talking about today. It's a hot topic for me at least, and I'm going to explain a little bit more about that as we go along. So I really invite anyone to jump in the chat box and ask questions or make comments. Try and get to those as quickly as we can. Um, our objectives today is to understand how do our traditional, and again, I'm going to insert the word survey methods often fall short. And I'm going to give you a different approach to how we might interpret our feedback more effectively. How do we turn strategies into insights and action that improves retention in particular? And I think this matters because, we're just not holding ourselves to a high enough standard. That's really what it gets to for me. And that it's just it's a little frustrating. Again, I'm going to forewarn everybody. This might be my biggest sort of soapbox topic, and I'll try not to get too preachy as we go along. But I think it's interesting to share a little bit of my background here. Obviously, my entire first 20 some odd years of my career were in HR. During that time, for several of the organizations I was with, we certainly conducted employee surveys. But at the time, I'm not going to profess that I knew a whole lot about employee surveys other than what some external consultant told us and what we decided to utilize for that particular company. But 15 years ago, when I joined Work Institute, and I think people that know me pretty well know that I want to know what I'm talking about. I want to understand the details. I want to understand why things are the way they are. I feel like I'm a pretty resourceful person. So within a couple of years of being at Work Institute, I really started to study the concept of the employee survey. I wanted to understand rating scales. I wanted to understand why they matter, what they meant, how do we interpret survey results, all of those things. I must have read a half dozen books. I would do research articles through academics. I looked at everything I possibly could to better understand how do we truly interpret survey results. And part of what drove me there is that Dr. Tom Mahan, who founded Work Institute, always talked about driving excellent scores. First we look at the excellence. That's where we want to celebrate. And we need those excellence to be more than 30%. If the fair fours are more than 15%, that there's an opportunity for remediation. And then those goods and very goods could be development opportunities. And so I believe Tom, but it's like I really wanted to understand it even better. I wanted to understand the logic behind it, the science behind it, and so my research began. And to some degree, it continues up until this day in terms of what are the new technologies, what are predictive analytics, all of those kind of things play into it. So that's what's going to drive this conversation today, at least this conversation with myself. But certainly, again, I invite any of you to jump in and make comments or ask a question. So I want to start with where we are in the U.S. workforce, and we'll talk a lot more about this, as we go along. But we track what we call the Net Excellence Score trend, and I'll explain that a little later in terms of how it's actually calculated. But as you can see, the trend around the core drivers that we track, the company as an employer, the manager, the team or the people I work with, and the job itself, have all been trending down since 2020. The pandemic year was a peak, if you will, but since then those scores have been going down. The team score sort of leveled out. The job score kind of leveled out a little bit this year. But this is pretty consistent with other organizations. If we look at the Gallup data, which again, I don't love the calculation of engagement, and that's just kind of a whole other topic and argument for another day. But let's just assume that this is some level of satisfaction with your employer. And the fact that Gallup has been tracking this for a long time, going back to 2000, and they would indicate that only 31% of the U.S. workforce is engaged in their work. That's certainly down from 2020 that they also saw as a peak, although it had been going up a little bit. And then 17% of the U.S. workforce is actively disengaged. What's really troublesome to me is that that number has never gotten above 35% in terms of the number of people engaged. That's that's not a lot of folks, right? That means some 65% of our workforce is just kind of like, oh yeah, I'm coming to work, right? That's really what it amounts to, and that's not a good thing. So we got to think about, why is this the case? Why is it that we can't engage our employees? Why is it there's such a level of either complacency or downright dissatisfaction in the workplace? And again, I would argue that we're simply not holding ourselves to a higher standard. And a lot of this sort of loops back to a few years ago. And for those of you that have listened to me speak in other venues before, know I've told this story a bunch of times. But I'm doing a speaking event in a company, and one of the things that they're talking about a number of different things. They're talking about safety, and when they talk about safety, they're talking about an excellent safety record. They're talking about their customers, and they're wanting an excellent customer experience, and they're talking about their customer service and wanting excellent customer service. All of these things, they're talking about a level of excellence that they expect in their organization. And then when they turn to talking about the employee experience, suddenly the delivery of it, the language changed. And that delivery of the language became a favorable experience. And I just don't get it, right? I don't get it why in every other area of our organizations, our companies, we have this high expectation of ourselves around quality, around patient experience, around customer experience, around safety, around compliance. All of these things, we expect such high standards. And yet when it comes to employees, we seem to just simply say, as long as we're okay, that's good. And I just simply don't understand it. I really don't. So just so we're on a level playing field, this is how typically, and I'd say probably 80 to 90% of all employee surveys are done on a 5-point Likert scale. Typically, it's some sort of agreement scale from strongly disagree to strongly agree. Occasionally, we're using fair to excellent ratings, but it's some sort of 5-point Likert scale. As you see below, what we show you here is that the really positive scores are the excellent scores, and that those fair poors, or those strongly agrees and disagrees, are negative scores, and the goods and very goods and the neutrals and agree are simply just neutral. And I'm going to get into that in a little bit deeper dive around that in just a few minutes. So I came at this and wanted to have kind of an objective view, right? And so let's assume that AI is not completely objective, but me and ChatGPT have become friends, and so I went in and I said, okay, so give me the argument for why grouping the agrees and strongly agrees, or reporting survey results on a favorable rating. Why should we do that? Why is that a good thing? And here are some of the things that ChatGPT told me, and this is consistent with all the things that I hear and all the things that I know about in the survey world. So number one, it simplifies interpretation for executives. And by the way, I'm probably going to get a little snippy here, because really, our executives are not smart enough to be able to interpret survey data other than to group these things into favorable responses. Yeah, it's kind of a clear digestible metric, that's fine. Leaders can track a single, easy to understand the number across time, teams, and organizations. 82% of employees favorably related their relationship with their manager. It sounds cleaner than X strongly agreed and Y agreed and Z were neutral. Cleaner? It sounds cleaner? Okay. Many providers and research firms use top box scoring to allow comparisons across organizations or industries. So I can attest to this. I've actually tried to attain some benchmark scores for certain things in the past. You can only buy favorable ratings. That's all you can get at. You can't get to the raw data. So those benchmarks are always around favorability. And yes, I understand comparisons are good, but what's more important, that we're be able to compare ourselves to other organizations, or that we're creating a great place to work? It reduces noise and tracking over time. Okay, well, what does that mean, noise, right? Again, we're trying to create a great place to work. And I would argue that that means we need to get into the details. We need to understand what's really being stated by our employees, what their perceptions truly are. Year over year trends are more stable with group this way. Again, stability is an objective here. It offers a buffer against overreacting to minor sentiment shifts. I want to know that those sentiments are shifting. And then the last one, encourages focus on strengths or wins. Top two box scoring is often used to celebrate high favorability. And I think this is really what it comes down to. I think executives want to feel good about what they're doing. I think CEOs want to see those high marks. The idea that we would report a score that said, 33% of our employees strongly agree that this is a great place to work. They don't like that, but they're more than happy to see that 90% have a favorable rating towards our company as an employer. It's just sort of baffling to me. By the way, I got one comment from my friend John. You're spot on regarding the higher standard. What if organizations thought about employees as customers? I'm going to get to that in just a minute, John. It completely changes the mindset when it comes to their voice, their experience, and ultimately retention. You're spot on too, John. Absolutely. So I asked my buddy ChatGPT to say, well, what's the argument for excellence? Why should we be thinking about our employee experience as excellent? And here's where I think we've got to be living. Here's what I think is important. True engagement lives at the top. Strongly agree responses reflect deep commitment, emotional investment, advocacy, not just compliance. These respondents are your most engaged employees, the ones likely to go above and beyond, stay longer, speak positively about the organization. Someone who agrees may not be disengaged, but they're often neutral. When a better opportunity arises, they're going elsewhere. They're not anchored. And this is what we're seeing. I don't have the employee turnover numbers in this presentation, but we know we've still got like 40 million people leaving their jobs voluntarily on an annual basis. And we're going to talk about those costs in a couple of minutes. Top box ratings are better predictors of retention. Data shows a much stronger correlation between strongly agreed responses and intent to stay. In fact, more often than not, we see no correlation, no predictability between favorable ratings and intent to stay for most companies. So when we get into predictive analytics, the favorability rating isn't providing us any predictive value. When you track just the top box or you look at that, you better identify pockets of real engagement or where it's slipping, right? It identifies excellence, not just satisfaction. And again, I can't stress enough, this is what we want to be. We want to be an excellent employer. Agree often reflects baseline satisfaction, but strongly agree reflects excellence in leadership, culture, experience. This is the thing, this is the one that got to me. This was just from ChatGPT. This is not Danny Nelms language. So this is what it's looking at in all of its world of collecting information. if you're trying to build a great workplace, not just an okay one, the top box is your target. You have to live in the strongly agrees. You have to live in the excellent world. That's what you need if you want to build a great workplace, not just an okay workplace. Um, Again, it's a sharper signal for action. Strongly agree responses are harder to earn. Uh, Declines in the top box are definitely early warning signs. It makes the metric more sensitive to real change in engagement. So again, it's not about, in our previous slide, we were talking about the fact that it takes out some of that variability in sentiment. I want to know about that variability in sentiment. I want to know that it's changing. I want to know what's happening from quarter to quarter, year to year, biannual, whatever it is we're doing from a survey perspective. So we have to understand that. And again, it avoids complacency. So, again, I'm not training ChatGPT out there right now. This was just me gathering information, but this truly reflects my sentiment. I mean, it was spot on pretty much in that we look at favorability ratings because it's easy. It's the easy things to do. It makes us feel good. It reduces variability. It's a nice little score from year to year, all those things. What it's not doing is helping us be a truly great place to work. Dr. Mahan would say that's a preferred employer. People prefer to work here over anywhere else. That's what we should be aiming for, and that's what we've got to be doing. So John mentioned customers, right? So again, I mentioned that excellent score earlier, and I'm going to get into that. But think about the net promoter score. Okay, so this is net promoter score is the standard in the customer experience world. This is what, almost everybody that's looking at customer experience uses this overall score. It's been tried and true for years. Now, instead of a 5-point Likert scale, they typically use an 11-point scale, 0 to 10. But notice that in order to be a promoter in the net promoter score, meaning I have a great experience and I'm willing to recommend this company to my friends and family members to do business with. So if I'm rating, Comcast, we can pick on Comcast, Comcast is not going to get very good ratings, so they're not going to be recommended for somebody else to do business with. You have to get a 9 or a 10 rating to be considered a promoter. If you're a 7 or an 8, you're just passing. That's okay. And think about that. Think about how many times you've given a 7 or 8 rating to B&A Airport or Avis Rental Car or whatever. And it's kind of like, well, I don't want to ding them too much, but it's a 7 or 8. And that basically means it was, it was good. It was fine. I didn't have any bad experiences, but I had no reason to say I had an outstanding experience. And that means I'm giving someone a 9 or 10. Everything lower than a 7 is a detractor, right? And so that's how we create our net promoter score. So Work Institute has taken that same approach and looked at it in a 5-point Likert scale. And I'm not trying to turn this into a sales presentation, everybody. I just want to draw a distinction. And I want to look at this on a closer view in terms of a different way to look at survey results and survey ratings. So we look at this and say, the strongly agrees and excellence are my positives. My neutrals are those good or very goods or neutral and agree. My negatives are those fair or poors, the strongly disagrees, the disagrees. And we want to make sure that if we get above a 35 score, that it's an area of strength, meaning we've got a much higher percentage of excellent scores than we do fair poor scores. That's what we're aiming for. That's what we're trying to achieve. And this is actually our dashboard tool that we're providing to our clients. And this is a demo data for our employer engagement survey. So look at the detail that we're actually providing for our customers. So on the left, we're actually giving a real breakout of the overall score, which is rating of organization. And by the way, that's not an index score. That's a question we're asking. What is your overall rating of your organization as an employer? And as you can see here, we only have 15% that are rating the organization as employer as excellent. We actually have 19% rating it as fair or poor, meaning we got a much higher percentage that think negatively about the company as an employer than we do that are excellent. So that's why we're getting this -4 here, right? We're getting a negative net excellence score because more people see it negatively or are detractors than those that are highly positive. And then we've got this massive, 67% that are just neutral. They're just sitting in the middle. And on any given day, they can even kind of go towards the excellent rating or they can drop into those fair poor categories. They're just neutral. They aren't your highly engaged. They aren't saying great things about you as a company. That's not what you're looking for. You want to drive those excellent scores. And by the way, in all of the supporting, sorry, I got to put my glasses on here for a minute. These are all of the supporting questions around rating of employers. So everything from coworkers to work-life balance to an environment of respect, availability of resources, communications. We're actually showing that the strongly agrees, the neutrals, the strongly disagrees. So we can see these very clearly by percentage basis. So we're actually able to see those sentiment changes, if you will, year over year. And we take and apply that net excellent rating to all of those scores. So as we can see, our biggest opportunities for improvement are the culture, leadership knowledge and skills, availability of resources, growth and development opportunities, communications. All of these are big areas for opportunity because, again, see, we don't have a lot of people that are strongly agreeing with any of the sentiment. A lot of folks are just hanging out in those neutral categories. This, to me, is how you look at survey data. This is how we see the real opportunities that we have. Of course, we're like everybody else. We're generating some AI summaries because we're also getting some qualitative data around this question. I'm not going to get into that detail, but this is how we're showing those ratings. I think this is where we have to live. I think this is what we're going to have to be doing because, again, I go back to, are we holding ourselves to a high enough standard? Is the standard high? Is it that we want people to strongly agree? Most of you that have ever heard me talk a lot, I've not always been a big fan of Gallup. I don't love their engagement scoring mechanism. But one of the things I have seen lately in their social media postings is they're starting to move towards talking about people strongly agreeing to things, strongly agreeing that they feel that their employer cares about their work-life balance or cares about their well-being. And those scores are generally fairly low. And so that's what we've got to be looking at. That's what we've got to make important. And the challenge is that it's the cost of turnover is on the rise. Even though turnover in the US is down a little bit over the last couple of years, the cost of turnover is actually going up. And we know that because of all the inflationary elements around salaries, but also around all the things that are required to replace an employee, whether it's background checks, drug screenings, advertising, recruitment fees, all of those things are increasing. So it continues to drive higher cost of turnover. And it's almost $1 trillion in the US in cost of turnover. And again, I'm not trying to be an advertisement for Gallup. They're not my favorite company. I'd much rather you be doing business with Work Institute. But Gallup would say that the low productivity cost or lack of engagement is costing companies almost twice that at $1.9 trillion. So between cost of turnover and lack of productivity, we got almost $3 trillion that it's costing organizations. So this is affecting the bottom line. We consistently see when we look at companies that are holding themselves to a high standard, if we look in that 75th percentile and greater in terms of overall of those that are highly engaged or providing high ratings, like excellent and strongly agree, that they're actually performing at a much higher level financially. They're generating higher revenue, they're generating higher profit. And this is ultimately the goal of companies, right? We exist to try and create a customer experience or widgets or whatever we're doing to try and generate profits. Either that's for our shareholders or for our stakeholders, or just to simply stay in business, right? We've got to be able to have some profitability. Even if we're a not-for-profit, a lot of healthcare organizations that are not-for-profit, you got to be bringing more in than you're spending, right? So we have to be able to have income, if you will, coming into the business, or we're not going to be in business for long. We're not going to be in the not-for-profit business, or we're going to be a truly not profiting business, and we're not going to be around very long. So it's costing us a lot of money. Um, I want to talk about this predictability thing just again for a minute. Again, we've looked at it over and over and over again. When we're using these favorable ratings, we're not showing correlations between favorability and intent to stay. And if we look at like employees who rate their employers as good or very good, are almost 3 times more likely to look for a new job in the next 3 months. So moving them from very good to excellent is a big deal. That's where we're starting again to get that high retention, that high engagement. That's what we're aiming for. That's what we're looking for. Um, and we've shown over and over that the net excellence score that we use is providing a much better measure and is actually tracking that that intent to stay on a much better basis. Um, again, we got story after story after story, but a company that we worked with a few years ago, their quote favorability ratings for their company were in the 80%, 80, 85%, and they had 40% turnover. How is that possible, right? I can have 80% of the company being favorable, but I've got 40% turnover. And when we in this case, we were able to dive into the actual strongly agree to strongly disagree scores, and only about 20% of the organization strongly agreed that it was a great place to work or that this was a place they were committed to. That tracks much more closely with what their actual turnover was. And so we've got to be looking beyond just these favorability scores. So I knew today was going to be a little bit shorter. We've been planning for about 30 to 35 minutes. I'm right at 30 minutes. I've got a guest coming to visit with me next week talking about the hybrid workplace. Reen Baskin from Reen's Baskin Strategies is going to be joining me. I've got Thomas Barnett joining me in a couple of weeks when we're going to wrap up this series talking about decoding the emerging workforce. So I'm really happy that this webcast series is going well. I appreciate everybody joining me this morning. I really hope that this starts to light a fire or light a fire of ideas around how do we take a much closer look at our survey results? How do we start to think about them in a different way and maybe start to look beyond these favorability ratings? And I think, unfortunately, this is going to be a place where you're going to have to look at who's currently providing your tools to you. A lot of the survey companies are only willing to provide favorability ratings, and they're not providing all of the deeper detailed information that I think is necessary to really understand how we're doing as an organization. So again, not trying to be a sales pitch for Work Institute, but we always talk about it being it's your data, not our data, and we want your data to be as detailed as possible so you can truly understand what's going on. So on your screen is a QR code. You can use that to register for our next webcast event, Workplace Evolution, Embracing Remote and the Hybrid Models. They're not going anywhere. They're here to stay. So we're here to talk about it. So hope everybody has a great rest of your week. Thanks again for joining our webcast today, and we'll talk soon.